Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of The Last Faith. I played on the PS5, it's also available on the PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series, Nintendo Switch, and PC. So let's get into the story. You play as Eric. You wake up in a strange world, you have no memory, and there's creepy monsters trying to kill you. You also discovered that you have been infected with a disease that can turn you into those creepy monsters, and well, you've got to race against time to basically figure out what's going on, fight creepy monsters, cure yourself, etc. And I will say the story is really kind of drip-fed. A lot of this gets explained to you by other people throughout the game. It's less of like cutscenes and whatnot giving you this information. But let's get into the audio, and I'm going to start with the voiceover work, which none of it really blew my mind, but I think a lot of the characters are very subdued characters anyways. At least the ones you hear from the most, and so the subdued deliveries limit what they can and cannot do, I think. Which is to say that none of it is bad, but none of it blew my mind. As for the music in the game, I really like the music in the game. I think it works very well with the setting, and what can I say, it just worked. I don't think it's like a soundtrack I'm gonna pick up and listen to later, but when you're playing the game, it's fully functional. And then you've got the sound effects, which I think are good sound effects. The only sound effect that I really noticed that stood out to me for some reason was when I was climbing up a wooden ladder and it sounded like a metal ladder. Otherwise, I think all the sound effects really work in the game as a whole. Whether it's your attacks, the creatures, the jumping, just the ambient noises, which were surprisingly good. I think those all work very well, and I know it's just a weird nitpicky thing, but otherwise the sound effects are great. So let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a Metroidvania Soulsbourne game. Which, if you've ever played two of those or any game that has married those in the past, yeah, you know what you're in for. It's a whole lot of exploration, unlocking new abilities, going back and exploring old areas now that you have the new abilities to get around better. Which is, you know, traditional Metroidvania, but then you get into the Souls-like, which is the combat is not necessarily extremely challenging, but you can get wrecked very easily. If you get wrecked, you can go back and collect your souls. If you get wrecked on your way to go back and collect your souls, well, you're fucked and you lose those souls, which happened to me a couple of times. I lost like a total of 20,000 souls. It was heart-wrenching. But it is also very much an RPG like those games can be. You defeat enemies, you gain XP, you level up your stats. In that sense, it's much more Souls-like because you upgrade your individual stats. You can, however, find different weapons that can give you different reach, different attack damage. You can upgrade those weapons. You can also find upgrades for your health pouches, etc. But then, like Soulsbourne and Metroidvania games, you have your big old boss fights, which were actually a lot of fun, learning the patterns, finding the enemies, defeating the enemies, and, you know, when you learn the boss patterns and you get that really good, clean victory, it feels so good on the inside, but up until that point, it is kind of painful. As far as full-on challenge goes, I don't think it's quite as hard as a Souls-like, but that's not to say that there isn't any challenge there. Let's get on to the controls, and I think they work well. They are responsive when you are attacking, you're dodging, you're whatevering. I do feel like the character moves a little sluggishly, but that's just how the game works. I don't think it's like a problem with the controls or the responsiveness of the controls. But let's get on to the graphics and visuals, and this is very much an indie game, so you already kind of know what the visuals are going to be like. Oh yeah, pixel art, baby. Admittedly, it is one of the more like detailed pixel art styles that they have. Not those giant pixels, but it's still very much pixel art, which isn't always my favorite. I would really love like a Metroidvania style game where it's like full-blown like anime or animated 3D graphics in full-blown like 2D space. I think that would be cool. But none of that is actually a knock against this game. It's got this honestly very Bloodborne like Victorian era feel to it in the clothing and the characters you run into. But that also bleeds into the buildings and some of the backgrounds. They feel very Victorian, and it is a dark and not really spooky environment, but you know, it is that dark, supposed to be kind of creepy environment. There are creatures rolling around and whatnot. But I gotta say, I do like the world, and like any good Metroidvania, you have your different, we'll call them biomes or zones, whatever you want to call them, whether they're sewers, a city, a castle, etc. But they all really fit with what's going on in the world and just the overall aesthetic, so I was happy with that, and I never felt like I was in some weird or fully out of place? And I also love the effects and the animations. I think your attacks are really cool and well animated. You've got your different weapons, which have their own different animations. Your spells, the effects around the fire, electricity, things like that. As well as the animation for the creatures, because I think that's actually cool and kind of important. You want your creatures to feel sufficiently, you know, creature monster-like, and their animation, their movements, that works. That's important, and they did a good job with that in this game. But then you also have the different weather effects and things like that throughout the world that I think they did a good job with, and I was overall very happy with the graphics and visuals. I know I don't necessarily love pixel art. I'm just kind of tired of that aesthetic, but I can appreciate if it's well done, and I think it was well done in this game. So let's get into the wrap up, and I'm gonna say that while the story didn't suck me in the way I would have liked it to, I did have fun with the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. I think they worked very well with the overall experience. It is a solid Metroidvania game. Some of the aesthetics kind of, like the animation and a bit of like the story kind of reminded me of Blasphemous, but far less grotesque or morbid. And that's not a bad thing. It didn't really revolutionize anything, but it also didn't do anything so criminally offensive. So I don't have a problem recommending it if you are looking for something new and you love a good Metroidvania. But if you're already locked into some stuff, then you could definitely wait on this. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me what's your favorite video game with a Victorian aesthetic? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.